Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next common question comes from WP Electronics. Do you know, every now and then I use a clapperboard to synchronise the video to the sound, just as a sort of kind of safety measure. If the synchronisation tools, I've got electronic synchronisation tools that sit between here and the sound recording, and every now and then I just catch my finger on the clapperboard, and I just did that and it smarted a bit. Anyway, this WP Electronics is responding to a video I did on the S50 second keyboard strip down and rebuilt part 1 restoration part 11 video I did, which was November 2023. And WP writes, I have an S50 that has some problems. Surprise, surprise, as Silla said. And one of them is scrambled video output. I ask if it's normal for the TSM3556 video chip to run hot. Now, this is a really interesting question. In general, right, chips on a circuit board should not run hot. Now, when I say not run hot, then you kind of get into a debate on what classifies as hot. Now, most computers, and depending on what you're doing with them, you'll often find the CPU heats up. And that's why you have a ruddy great big heatsink that sits on top of the CPU with thermal paste that joins it between that and the heatsink, and quite often have a fan on top of it as well to keep the CPU from heating up. But in most load operations, the CPUs don't tend to get all that hot. They kind of get warm to the touch. Now, in the synthesizer environment, it's not uncommon for some chips on circuits to be warm to the touch when in operation. And if this chip is running so hot that it is burning your fingers when you just touch them on the chip, then I would probably say that's indicating something is wrong with either the chip itself or the circuitry supplying the chip, because chips, as I say, are generally not designed to run hot. First of all, I'd start by looking at, is the chip getting too much power? So if you go and look at the circuit diagram for the S50 synth, you should see that it's getting no more than 5 volts or maybe 3 volts, depending on where on the chip it is. I'm not looking at the actual circuit diagram, that's the first thing. And understand whether it's running with tolerances. So you need to obviously go on to the manufacturer of the chip. And again, I'm not looking at the machine when I'm responding to this. But you should be able to find some tolerances where it tells you how the chip should be running. But the problem might not be the chip. The chip may be exhibiting the problems, or you may have burnt the chip out. But the chip might not be the problem. The problem might be downstream from the chip in terms of resistors and capacitors that have basically let go of the ghost. Anyway, WP wrote back to me and said the chip is reading 68 degrees C on the IR thermometer, and I suspected the 2S RAM 4468 and chips and replaced them, but without results. I also replaced the HC245 and the HC575 ICs from the video sector. The power lines are okay, sending 5.2 volts as required by the circuit, including the 3 volt auxiliary voltage. The system is booting normally, which indicates the CPU is okay. Now all I have to do is change the video chip. One more observation: without the video chip, the VFD display only shows the characters this way, and it shows a load of dotted lines, so it's not actually receiving signal. Now 68 degrees is hot, and I would say that because you wouldn't be able to put your finger on it for very long without necessarily getting a bit burnt. But it's not necessarily toasty hot, and I've seen some instances where things have been a lot hotter than that. But I seem to think that this is a good bet that the problem is the chip has gone bad, especially as the power seems to be within tolerable ranges. So if the power is as to spec, which is 5.2 volts on the S50, then I'm kind of thinking the chip has something internally within the chip has shorted, and that's why it's heating up. Anyway, he didn't write back and say whether we'd solved the problem or not, but hopefully that gives you guys some advice in terms of troubleshooting and how you work your way through troubleshooting machines. I must admit, my experience of the S50, and I'd done a mailbag earlier where I said, I've actually solved my problem, but the S50 has been my if you've seen the film Gone in 60 Seconds, the S50 has been my Eleanor. Next comment or question comes from Optical Man, and this was in response to actually I think this was a website comment, if I'm honest. Anyway, the Optical Man says, for some reason format SD isn't showing up on my S20 S2000 2400 I think it is meant to be, but it's got too many zeros in the wrong places. And it isn't at the bottom of the menu. So I then pushed that out to the community and said, but it's kind of an issue I haven't seen. My S24000 seems to work fine. Optical Man writes back and says, actually, Isla Instruments got back to me and said, I need to use the proper SD card and not one that's a micro SD card that slots into a holder, which is what I was trying to do. Fair enough, I didn't know that, but then I have to be honest and say, I tend to go and buy SD cards for certain purposes. Like there's an SD card there that is for one of the synthesizers. What I do, if I'm honest, is I don't swap SD cards between synthesizers like I don't swap USB dongles between synthesizers. I tend to go, and they're not expensive nowadays. That's the whole point, really. You can pick a 32 gig SD card up for under a tenner now. And likewise, you can pick a 4-5 gig thumb drive up for peanuts, because that's where the market is. So what I tend to do is I bought several of them years ago, and every time I buy a machine that needs a thumb drive, like the Kronos behind me, like the Behringer UBXA, which is on top of and I've got a number of others that require a USB drive to move files around, I just have a drive that is dedicated to that machine. It makes things far easier when you're trying to, you need to move something and you're looking for a USB drive that is blank or an SD card that is blank. That's just me. That's the way I do it. Anyway, as I say, I never use the micro SD cards. I always use the full SD cards because that's just what I do. But what he did come back and say is that yes, Isla got in touch with him. But it wasn't actually the SD card at all. He was just in the wrong mode. But there you go. Just thought I'd leave that. But SD card, top tip: get SD cards for the machines and leave them dedicated to the machines. Write on the SD card which machine they are and use it that way.